Hello everyone, my name's Daniel and I'm a programmer and an artist, and today I'm going to make a video talking about how you can make a geometry node group that functions like merge by distance, but for curves. There's probably a million different ways how you could end up with a geometry where you had overlapping points, but just one that comes to mind off the top of my head is if you use the fillet curve modifier, then whenever you increase the count on the bevel sort of effect, all of the points that are in a straight line, or if you can control the radius by some parameter as well. And if you do that, then if I set the position of these, you'll see that we'll just combine X, Y, Z. And if we scale this, then you can see that all of these points that were in a straight line, even though they look like one point here, they actually got all of the points from the fillet curve modifier just stacked right on top of each other. So that would be one case where you might want to do it. Now, you could potentially control that by looking at the angle and then changing the count as well, but that can be a little bit tricky. So the question then is, how do we remove these doubled vertices or merge those by distance so that they become one? And so that's what we're going to make today. I guess the first way to do it is probably most people already know about. You could convert this to a mesh, curve to mesh, merge by distance, and then mesh to curve, and that would work. There are some benefits to using this method. One is that it will, if you want to merge the vertices of different splines in the curve, that's probably the easiest way to do it. The downside of this method is that you have to convert it to a mesh, and when you do that, any curve specific data that's on the geometry gets lost. So if you want to really make this method work, then you have to capture an attribute before, and you have to capture the radius and possibly the normal as well, and then afterwards you have to do a set radius and pass that through. And it starts to get messy, and I also think that doing curve to mesh and mesh to curve is slower than the method I'm going to show for if you just want to keep it all a curve. So there's pros and cons to both. I think it's good to know about both of them. But recently I've been leaning more towards keeping curves as curves when possible. And so the way you can do that is just by adding a delete geometry in here. And we're going to delete points. But we need to know which points are in the same position to be able to delete only those, because otherwise we delete the whole curve. So the way we can do that is we can look at the position of the points, and we want to evaluate that position at a different index. And the index we want to evaluate at, we can find by using the offset point in curve. And then if we just offset by +1 or -1, that should work. We want to connect the point index to that, and then we can just compare, is that position equal to our position? And then with that, the epsilon here becomes our merge by distance, basically. The other thing we probably want to do just for safety purposes is use this valid offset, because that's always going to be true on a curve like this that's cyclic. But if I was to let's delete this segment here and then make this closed again. So this is not actually a cyclic curve. This point doesn't connect back to the curve, but because it's in the same location, it gets removed, which means we lose the segment that was going through that space there. So that might not be what you wanted, probably isn't, and so we can just do an and here. We want to say, are they in the same position, and it's a valid offset, because that will be false when we loop around the curve if the curve is not cyclic. And just like that, I believe that is all that you need to make a merge by distance modifier for curves specifically. So then what I would do is I'd select all that, and I'd make it a group, and I would put this epsilon value as an input, and call this curve merge by distance. And that is a useful little node group to have in your helper functions library if you have one of those, which I recommend if you do a lot with geometry nodes. A couple things to note just about this method compared to converting it to a mesh. When you use this method, it will merge duplicate points in a spline, but if you have two splines that overlap, they'll be kept separate, which can either be useful or not the behavior you want, depending on what you're trying to do. If you convert it to a mesh and then you have the edges of the mesh, the vertices overlap at some point, then those will get merged into a single curve. So you can imagine, like, if there was, if I was to take all of these points here and rotate those 90 degrees like that, well, then this point here is shared between the two curves. And in this method here, you can see they're kept separate. That middle point got shifted up here. Whereas if we were to convert this to a mesh, to curve and merge by distance, then you can see that, well, we don't know what will happen exactly. It's split it weird because the other thing is when you convert it from a curve to a mesh and then you merge by distance, it can create situations where you have a vertex with more than two edges coming into it, because that's supported in a mesh. But then when you convert it back to a curve, it's going to separate those out. And so, because each point is connected to the previous point and the next point, but that's all the logic there is in a curve as far as like edges would be in a mesh. And so when you convert your mesh back to a curve, it's going to automatically somehow figure out how to separate those points that have more than two edges connected to them into multiple splines, and it may not decide to do that in the way that you want. So that's another thing to be aware of. But if you had a case where you had like multiple curves end to end like this, and you wanted those to be merged together, then you would need to either add some extra logic to the curve thing, or the curve to mesh method would work better for that. So hopefully that proves the point. There are pros and cons to both of them. I do think the curve method's probably faster, a little bit, but they're both pretty fast, so probably not much of a concern there. Anyway, just a quick little video about curves and managing the points in them. Hopefully that was useful. If you have any thoughts or any other methods that you like to use, feel free to leave a comment. I have a Discord server. There's a link for that in the description. You're welcome to join there and chat or ask if you have any questions about anything. And then if you're interested in other things that I've made a bunch of different tools for geometry nodes, useful sets of assets and stuff like that. I recommend checking those out on my website. There's tons of information over there. But other than that, that's all I've got for this one. Thanks for watching.